Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel and to another book review. This book review is so special to me because we are going to be talking about a new favorite book of mine. It is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. Oh my goodness. And as always, I like to say that I will get into spoilers, but that'll be later on. So if you haven't read this book yet, you can watch until I say, okay, turn off the video, spoilers are ahead. So for now, you can keep watching, I'll let you know. And I want to say that I just adore this book. I give this book 1,000,000 out of 5 stars. I loved it so much, and I didn't think I would, and there's not really a reason for that. I just didn't think I was gonna fall in love with this book, and I really can't fault it. Like, I plan on doing my book reviews kind of like my last one, where I talk about what the book is about, my general thoughts on it, what I liked, what I didn't like, and then some quotes that I loved. And with this book, the what I didn't like section is going to be incredibly short because I could only think of a couple things that were like maybe not perfect, but to me it's still perfect. Like, this book, I had to search for the faults in it, really. So if that tells you anything, like, you need to read this book. Now, I'm going to get into it so I don't ramble on forever. Okay, so let's get into what this book is all about. Oh my goodness. Okay, so this story follows a woman named Clementine West. She is a book publicist in New York City, and she loves her job, but she's definitely been kind of overworked lately. And 6 months ago, she lost her aunt. Her aunt passed away, and in her will, she left Clementine her apartment in New York City. So Clementine has moved into this apartment, and she's been grieving her aunt, struggling with that, with memories, and living in this apartment, which her aunt used to live in. Which brings up a lot of, again, memories, good and bad, I guess. And her aunt always told her stories about how her apartment was magical. She always told her that her apartment can slip through time. It can take you 7 years into the past or 7 years into the future. And she even told her a story about a woman named Vera who she found in her apartment. She actually ended up falling in love with, and things didn't quite work out. And so she always told stories about the magic of the apartment, and Clementine always believed these stories. She always believed that her aunt, you know, she always believed what she told her, that the apartment was magical. Although throughout her life, every time she'd go to that apartment, she never experienced any of that magic herself. So as she was getting older, she stopped, well, she, I guess, slowly stopped believing in the magic, and she just never experienced anything there for herself until one day she has moved into this apartment that she inherited, and she's kind of, you know, unpacking, settling down, and one day a man who, I believe his name is Ewan, it's spelled I-W-A-N, I'm gonna say Ewan, it could be wrong, Ewan wakes her up, and she's obviously and understandably freaking out over this random man in her apartment, only to find out that the apartment has taken her back 7 years. So Ewan was staying at her aunt's apartment at that time when her aunt was still alive, and he was staying at her apartment because he is the son of a family friend of hers, and so he let her stay, or she let him stay in her apartment 7 years ago. Clementine, I don't think, knew this, at least not in the present. She didn't realize that her aunt had let him stay. So it takes her a few minutes. She eventually realizes, after she's trying to kick him out, she realizes that the apartment has taken her back 7 years when she looks at the calendar. So it is quite the story. I didn't think that I would fall in love with, like, the whole time travel and magical realism aspect of this story, but wow. And I saw in an interview, Ashley Poston talked about how she loves a romance story, but she always loves putting a twist on her stories. So for this one, it's time travel and magical realism. And I believe in her other book, The Dead Romantics, which I'm going to read next, it's a similar kind of vibe. And I think with her newest story, a novel romance, I think that's what it's called, or a novel love story, it's probably a similar type of thing. So I can't wait to get into more of her books. But if that's your thing, I think you'll love this story. Another thing is that Clementine always traveled with her aunt. So again, her and her aunt had a very close relationship. So this loss hit her extra hard. They would travel the world together, and she always kind of felt like her aunt was leading her through the world. She was a bit more maybe reserved and not as outgoing and open to new experiences, but her aunt kind of introduced her to that kind of lifestyle, and her aunt was just such a carefree spirit. And I think Ashley Poston did a fantastic job of writing about her character, like through the eyes of Clementine, that it makes it feel like her character is a huge part of this book, even though she has passed away. It's such a beautiful way of writing about a character that I haven't read before. It's quite different, really, but I love her aunt. I kind of wish we got to know more of her character, but obviously we can't. But yeah, she traveled the world. She took Clementine with her on all these amazing trips, and her passport's full of stamps and memories with her aunt. And so obviously, as I said, that's why this loss hit her really hard. And her aunt had 2 rules in her apartment. It was 1, always take your shoes off at the door, and 2, never fall in love in this apartment. So at one point in the book, Clementine says how she's pretty sure at one point she forgot to follow rule number 1, which is taking off her shoes. And with rule number 2, falling in love in that apartment, is kind of what this book is really all about. I do normally save quotes for the end of the video, but I just had to read this one to you. It says, and it's like right in the beginning of the story, so it's no spoiler or anything. It says, "My aunt used to say, if you don't fit in, fool everyone until you do. She also said to keep your passport renewed, to pair red wines with meats and whites with everything else, to find work that is fulfilling to your heart as well as your head, to never forget to fall in love whenever you can find it, because love is nothing if not a matter of timing, and to chase the moon. Always, always chase the moon." And it's funny reading that because one of her rules was to not fall in love in the apartment, but I guess fall in love whenever you can if it's not in the apartment. But I just thought that was such a lovely way to start a chapter. So now we are going to get into the things I liked about the book, or in my case, loved about the book. And then I'll get into those minor things I didn't love so much, I guess. And then I will go into quotes. And as I said, continue watching. I will get into spoilers later on. First and foremost, I loved that Ashley Poston wrote about the apartment as if it was a character in the book. She really made the apartment come to life, which was beautiful. I've got my notes right here. So she truly does a great job of describing the apartment and even the building. It truly feels like you're there in this magical apartment, which is so nice. She describes the furniture, the feel of the apartment, and you got the 2 pigeons who live on the AC unit outside of the window. Those parts always cracked me up. I loved that. And while a part of me was like a little creeped out by the apartment, I just also really loved it. And now I have to talk about Ewan, because of the books I have read so far, at least of the books I've read in my life, which isn't a ton, but we're getting there, Ewan is just my favorite male character I think I've ever read about. He is, to put it simply, he is such a perfect male character. He's charming, he's funny, he's sweet, he's super polite and loving. And he's also a great cook. He was always so sweet to her. He helped her realize things that she hadn't realized, and he kind of helped her to look at things a bit differently in life, because she was in some ways quite pessimistic after losing her aunt. She, busied herself with her work and overworked herself, as I said. So she was trying to kind of almost, like, how would you describe it? She kind of tried to hide certain parts of who she was. I think in some ways she was trying to be more like her aunt and also like her boss, and just work really hard, try and kind of maybe ignore love and romance and, put that aside and focus on her work and everything and her career, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think it became unhealthy. It got to a point where she, again, was overworked. So yeah, but I love his nickname for her. Lemon was just the cutest thing in the world, and he's just all around such a lovable character. He could do no wrong in my eyes, and I can imagine that Clementine was of course shocked and terrified to see him at first, because imagine waking up in an apartment and a random man is there. I understand, like, understandably she flipped on him and kicked him out, or wanted to kick him out. But I also was kind of surprised at how quickly she warmed up to him. In a way, she did warm up to him quite quickly, but I think the reason is because once she realized she was living in the past, I think that it made her feel closer to her aunt. So I kind of understand why she ended up letting him stay, and their relationship kind of grew from there. So I think it made her feel closer to her aunt by living in a time where she was still alive. I also just love the way that Ewan seems to just get Clementine. He understands her. She says she's boring and like predictable, and she likes routine and everything, and that no matter how hard she kind of tried to live life like her aunt and like her boss, she was someone who just, I think at one point in the book toward the end, she said like she's her parents' daughter, like she likes routine and that kind of thing. But he still finds her so fascinating and so beautiful, no matter how much she doesn't like certain parts of herself or doesn't want to show certain parts of herself. He's always trying to find out more about her, and I just loved that. I loved the way that they first got to know each other when she first met him in the apartment. It was so genuine and beautiful. And, you know, based on her aunt's warning about her story with Vera, I just didn't think this story was going to have a happy ending. And I won't tell you what happens in the end. I won't tell you if it's a happy ending yet or if it was a sad ending. You can, you know, obviously if you haven't read the book, I will leave that out for now. But I just, the whole time I was reading this, I had such a bad feeling. And that might sound bad because like this was my favorite book ever. I love it. But yeah, the whole time I was reading it, I was kind of on the edge of my seat thinking, oh, this is not going to end well. Because literally on the cover of the book, it says right place, wrong time. I just thought the whole time, I was like, oh no, like I don't really want to get to the end of this. I don't think it's going to end well. And as I said, I'm not going to tell you what happens. But yeah, I was just almost, I was so eager to finish it that I read it so quickly. I read this book in like just under 2 days. I'm not even kidding. But yeah, I'll wait till we get into the spoilers to tell you more about the ending. I really liked the fact that Clementine loved her job. I feel like you don't always read about characters or even meet people in real life who genuinely enjoy their jobs. I like that she's got a great relationship with her boss as well, and that she was trusted enough to potentially take over her boss's job or some of her boss's responsibilities because her boss was going to retire, I think at the end of the summer. And I liked that her boss also just, they had such a great relationship. Her boss encouraged her to take time off and to enjoy it because at the end of the summer, Clementine would always go on these big trips with her aunt, but obviously her aunt passed away, so they weren't able to do that this year, but her boss still encouraged her to take that time off and to travel somewhere new. I just really liked her boss. She was a very hardworking woman. I think she was like unmarried, didn't have kids, but she was another person who I think reminded her of her aunt, which is probably also why they had a great relationship. Okay, I think it is time, if you have not read this book, to turn off the video and please come back after you've read it because we are about to get into spoilers. I'm going to continue on with the things I liked about the story as well. So yeah, if you haven't read this, come back soon and we will dive into all the details later on. But yes, if you've read it, keep watching because I have a lot more to say. Okay, so I was so glad when Clementine finally began to read, and again, I didn't really know what was coming yet, but I quickly put the pieces together. But when she finally read the article that James Ashton, aka Ewan, when he wrote that article, I'm so glad she finally read it. I knew it was coming at that point. I knew that he was going to be Ewan. I just knew. At that point though, I had no clue if he was going to remember her or even know who she was. I just wasn't entirely sure. But James is his granddad's name, we learn, and Ewan is his middle name. And so he's there for this proposal, and he and Clementine have reunited in the present. And once she realizes that he was the one who wrote the article and he is the chef that's coming for this proposal at her work, she was so nervous. I love that she had this plan of what she was going to say and do and how she was going to act. And as soon as she saw him, that whole plan just went out the window and she didn't know how to act. She was shocked. She saw him 7 years in the past when he was 26 and now he's like 33, right? I think that's 7 years. So, you know, some people do change physically, emotionally, mentally. Like so many changes can happen within 7 years. If I think back to who I was 7 years ago, that was 2017. I was a completely different person. And so yeah, I've changed so much. And so I'd imagine he did as well, which we do learn, yes, he did. He definitely looks a bit different, but she can still tell it's him. So during the whole proposal meeting, I was so eager to see if he remembered her. And Ashley Poston did a great job of keeping you on the edge of your seat during that moment. And throughout the meeting, you know, he was making eye contact with her. He'd kind of glance over at her. She tried not to look at him, but couldn't help it. I still wasn't sure if he remembered her. And then as they were left alone, oh my gosh, when the meeting was over and everyone had left the room except Clementine and Ewan, I was just like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? And as he's leaving the room, when he kind of bent down to her and whispered to her, "It was good to see you again, Lemon," I loved it. So we find out that he remembered her, and I was so happy about it. Oh, it was so nice to see them reunited in the present, because it meant that there was a chance. They had a chance to be together. Even though it was going to be a bit different, they had a chance, and that was all I needed to know. When Drew tells Clementine that James Ashton had rejected their proposal, I felt really bad. I was kind of like, why would he do that? The meeting went so well. He seemed to love them. Like, what happened? I love when Clementine went to the Olive Branch, which is the restaurant that James Ashton was the chef. I love that she kind of cornered him. She found him. She was like, she kind of lied about why she was there. They weren't quite believing her. She storms in, she goes to find him, and she finds him, and she kind of corners him, and she's like, why did you reject our proposal? Like, what happened? Was it because of me? And she finds out that it was, but it's not necessarily what she thought. She thought that he wouldn't want to work with her. And he comes out and says that, I didn't think you'd want to work with me. So they both kind of realized that it might lean toward being unprofessional for them to work together, because they did have some history there. They had a bit of a romance back, 7 years ago. So they weren't sure that it would be super professional. The book is really all about the right person and being at the right place at the wrong time. So it feels like throughout the book they had a few opportunities to get together, but it just wasn't the right time, which was kind of heartbreaking, but it also made sense. So yeah, they both kind of felt like it might be unprofessional to work together, but she also believed that, her company could do amazing things for him and for his cookbook, and so she really did, want him to give them a second chance. So she kind of begged, or demanded really, for him to give them a second chance, and he said he would talk about it with his agent, and he eventually does give them a second chance, which I was really glad. I guess she struggled to find, or to see, how Ewan grew throughout the 7 years. It was difficult because in her present day, she was getting to know past Ewan and present Ewan like at the same time, and so she was kind of comparing him to his past self, which isn't really fair, and I'll get into this in a bit, but yeah, that's not really fair to do to someone. But I also understand why she's doing it, because she's getting to know past Ewan, present Ewan kind of at the same time. So she is comparing him to his past self without recognizing how he's grown in positive ways. And I do think he was definitely putting on this facade. He had this professional kind of face on in professional settings, which there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. But I think at this point she still hadn't gotten to know him outside of work settings or professional settings, and so she didn't really see how he was similar. She only saw how he was different. But slowly throughout the book, as she does spend more time with him outside of work, she does find little cracks in his facade that shows that he is still Ewan. She was very kind of confused during the presentation with the whole proposal about how he was speaking about food, because when she first got to know him in the apartment, he was speaking with so much passion, and one of the things he emphasized was that it's not always about the food, it's about the memory, it's about the people you're enjoying that food with. And while of course the food needs to be good and high quality and taste nice, it is more about the experience, the people, the memory, the setting, all of that. But in his presentation 7 years later, he was talking about more of the fact that it's the skill and the way you create your culinary art, and she was disappointed in what he was saying. She felt like his kind of passion for food had changed, and it was more about his facade and impressing people. But little did she know, again, he still had that passion there. It was just not so obvious, I guess. Another thing I loved was the whole cooking class. So when he gave them a second chance, he invited all of the, would you call it an agency or like a publishing company? He invited all of those people to just see how they worked together, how they dealt with food, how they cooked together. So Drew and Clementine go, and I just loved that whole chapter. It sounded so fun and funny. I actually laughed out loud at one moment as I was reading it. So that whole chapter was really great. It sounded so fun, and it all seemed quite effortless and lighthearted, and they didn't take it too seriously. even though Clementine was kind of a nervous wreck going into it. And I had a feeling that Clementine and James would end up alone at the end of the night, and I was right. I just adored that chapter. And I loved the next chapter too, where he asks so if she wants to join him for dinner, and she does. And I loved the banter between he and Clementine and his friends, the ones who own the fajita truck in New York. I loved that whole chapter because we got to know about his experience at the Culinary Institute of America and the friends he made there and the funny stories that they shared about him. I just loved that. I loved that he introduced her as Lemon instead of Clementine, and she realized that he only called her Clementine in more professional settings, but the nickname remained, which I loved. And yeah, they shared stories, they shared their love of food together, and that is the friend we find out that Ewan in the past convinced his friend, Miguel, to open a food truck. That was him. Those are the fajitas that he made for Clementine 7 years ago. So I loved that whole, it felt like a kind of like full circle, like, oh, now it makes sense. I loved that. And at the end of that chapter, when, I don't know if it was Miguel, but one of the friends said something about how, oh, it was after you met that girl and her name had something to do with a song, and Clementine was like, oh gosh, I don't know if I want to know about this, but I kind of do. And he started singing, oh my darling Clementine. Oh my gosh, I loved that part. I just loved it because it just shows that throughout those 7 years, she was what he thought of and she was what he dreamed of, and he never forgot about her. He loved her throughout that whole time and never found the right person until they were reunited again, and I just loved that. Another thing that I loved was that I think it was the beginning of the next chapter, we find out that Ewan does know about the time-traveling apartment. He did know about it. So Clementine realizes that at some point she ended up telling him. And so, yeah, you know, because he says he met her when she was 22, when in real present time she's like 29, 30 years old. So he had to wait even longer for her. So now we get to the letter that Vera sent to Clementine's aunt. So a letter came and it was made out to her aunt, who, as we know, yes, has passed away. And it's from Vera, who I didn't think we were going to meet in this book, really. We met her, in, you know, in the past through Clementine's story, but we never really met her actual character in present day. So I didn't think we would. So I was kind of surprised by that. But a letter came. And I love that her friends, Drew and Fiona, supported her in going to bring that or return that letter to Vera, because she needed to let her know that her aunt was no longer alive and that she wouldn't hear from her. So she brought the letter back to her in person, and it sort of felt like she could close that chapter of her life. And, you know, she found out that actually Vera and her aunt stayed in touch over the years. Even though things didn't work out with them romantically or anything like that, they kept in touch over the years. But I guess she never knew that Clementine's aunt had passed away. So it felt like closure in the best way. Even though that part was kind of sad, it kind of broke my heart a little bit, the way they cried together and talked about her aunt. I loved that. Yeah, it was heartbreaking but also sweet for them to kind of finally meet each other and to kind of have closure through each other, which was quite nice. There's more I want to talk about with that, and you probably already know, but I'll get to that later. Another thing I liked that I actually kind of liked that Clementine confronted Ewan about his facade and about how she feels like he's changed so much. I kind of feel like she needed to get it off her chest. However, she probably shouldn't have done it at that time and at that place. At his opening of his new restaurant, I think it was called Hyacinth, like the flower, I think she shouldn't have done it then, but I also feel like she needed to get it off her chest, but she could have said it in a nicer way that wasn't accusatory. In the past, when he kind of told her about his dream of opening up a restaurant, he talked about wanting to do it in a different way. He talked about wanting to open up a space that was warm and inviting and comfortable. And in present day, his new restaurant was kind of cold. The lighting was harsh and bright. The seats were uncomfortable. It just wasn't what she thought he would do. So again, she was kind of disappointed in him, and she let him know. I like that he told her in that moment that maybe she needed to let herself change too. I like that he didn't really he didn't raise his voice. He didn't get mad at her. He stayed calm and he listened to her. But he also told her that change isn't a bad thing and that people change a lot over time. Like, I think I might have, I don't know if I said this already in this video, but I have changed a lot over the past 7 years myself. And if someone were to compare me to who I was then, I would be kind of offended too. But again, he stayed calm. He listened to what she had to say, and then he walked away. I like that Clementine ended up deciding to leave her job. I was kind of surprised by it because of how much she talked about how she loved her job, but I think she was struggling to maybe find her purpose in it at this point. She was working at that same job for 7 years, and she did feel like she was working towards something. So I think quitting did kind of feel like, I don't know, she worked so hard for all these years and now she's just gonna quit. But I think I love that she took that risk for her own happiness. And it just so happened to work out that by quitting that job, it was no longer unprofessional for her to be with Ewan. But that's not really, I think, the main reason why she did it. I just think she wasn't happy anymore. She wasn't finding it as fulfilling anymore. And as her aunt told her, find work that's fulfilling to you. And I think she had just kind of done her time at that job. I think it was time to move on, and I really admire people who know when it's time to move on to the next chapter in their life. So I really liked that. I think she finally realized that that's simply not who she was anymore. She didn't want to really climb like the corporate ladder. I think she wanted to experience more in life. She wanted to travel. She wanted to fall in love. And by throwing and forcing herself into her work, she was kind of neglecting a part of her that she had forgotten once her aunt passed away. So yeah, I loved that. She wanted something more constant and consistent in her life, which is not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But she had to stop kind of chasing a life that wasn't her own. She had to stop chasing the life of her aunt and of her boss and be her own person. I love when we found out that the man in the cab with her who encouraged her to become a book publicist or to work with books was Ewan. I wasn't expecting that. I don't quite know how she didn't really recognize him, but we find out that he was the man in the cab, which I loved because it just shows that they were always going to come back to each other. You know, I just love that. And he encouraged her to work with books because that's what she told him she wanted to do. So he's kind of the reason that she ended up, you know, moving into that career as a book publicist, which I really loved. And we're moving on to the ending. The ending was absolutely perfect in my eyes. Oh my goodness. So it was sort of an interesting mix of emotions that I felt toward the end because I think the way this book was heartbreaking, there were two reasons why I found it heartbreaking. But it didn't feel like the actual book as a whole was heartbreaking. So there were two moments. One was just, I think, throughout the book, the grief and the, you know, the stages of grief that she went through in remembering her aunt and trying to move past her death. So that part was heartbreaking in the book, and also the goodbye to Ewan, the past Ewan. So she goes into the apartment and she tells him, like, go, you'll see me in the future. You know, she told him about the 7-year slip, the time traveling apartment, and she told him, I met you in the future. You're going to be amazing. I promise. And I wanted to cry in that moment, but because you know that they've reunited in the future, it's not so sad. It's more happy than anything else, but it is still a goodbye. So maybe that's why I felt a little bit sad. I didn't actually cry. I thought I was going to with this book, but I didn't actually, because I think more than anything it was more happy than sad, which is the complete opposite of what I thought this book was going to be, so that was kind of nice. I like that she also told him I'm sorry, and he was confused as to why, but it's because she failed to recognize his growth over the past 7 years, so she apologized to him for her future self, which was kind of nice. She needed to live in the present and love him in the present for the relationship to work. So it was the right thing for her to do, to say goodbye to the past Ewan, and he was moving out of her aunt's apartment at that time anyway, so it kind of worked out. She knew that, and it was the right time to say goodbye. Okay, when it was her birthday and she was at the Met with her friends, in front of the Van Gogh, I think it was in front of the Van Gogh paintings, I like that that was kind of her birthday tradition and that she did that every year. It was just something she enjoyed doing, which is quite nice and different. And she found out that Drew told her that James Ashton had agreed to work with them. So he chose them, which was so nice. And she told her friends that she'd quit her job. And, you know, they were all sad to see her go, but happy for her that she was moving on to something new and exciting in her life. And I loved, first of all, when I read the part where the little girl was at the Met with her parents looking at the paintings, and a man sat next to her on the bench, and she didn't know who it was at first, and this little girl comes over and she's like, do you like pigeons, or do you like birds? And he was like, most of them, but I'm still not too sure about pigeons. And she realized it was Ewan. I loved that part, but when I first read that, I got so confused because I actually thought that it was his daughter or something, so I was super confused. I like gasped, and then I realized that that wasn't the case. I was like, thank God. I loved that part though. And then she realized it was him. He said happy birthday. He brought her sunflowers. He remembered her favorite color, her favorite flowers. Oh, that part was everything to me. And I love that he told her he thought about coming there every year to see her on her birthday, but he, you know, he had to keep his distance until she knew who he was. I loved that part so much. And then in the end, I love that he brought her to his new restaurant. So it was still Hyacinth, but he changed the decor on the inside and everything. And he surprised her with the changes he made. It was more inviting, warm, and comfortable now. And when she reminded him of what he would do when he opened up a new restaurant all those years ago, he realized, he actually listened to her. And, you know, even though, again, he was probably a little offended that she didn't recognize his growth, he also knew that she had a point and that you can't forget where you come from. You have to stay humble. And, you know, it is about the food, but it is much more like important to have your customers enjoying your food with great company in a great setting. And he realized that, and so he made those changes. And I love that he made her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and that was her perfect meal. One more thing I want to mention before I go into kind of some things that I sort of predicted about the story and the things I didn't like, I guess. But I loved the lemon flower tattoo. I love that she knew about all his tattoos before, but when she met him in the present, she realized he had a lemon flower tattooed over his heart. And the quote when, you know, she asked him, like, when did you get this? And he said about 7 years ago. So right after he said goodbye to her, I guess, he got the tattoo. And she's like, what did you tell people when they would ask about it? And he said, well, I got it for a girl who I met at the right, or it was the right girl, wrong time, or like right place, wrong time. And she was like, well, what would you say now? And he said, I would say that, you know, we finally found the right time, or something like that. That was so, so sweet. I loved that so much. Just, it could not have been a more perfect ending in my opinion. And I just want to get into, again, those tiny, tiny minor things that I guess if you, I don't know, read this book, you may not love. Again, this is not a big deal to me, but to someone it might be. Okay, so the main thing that I think someone wouldn't like about this book is that it's sort of predictable. Now, the ending, in my opinion, was not really too predictable. I really thought it was going to be a heartbreaking ending. What was predictable, I wrote it at the bottom. So these were some things that I don't know, that could have been twists and turns throughout the story, but they were quite predictable, so I wasn't surprised. So in the way beginning of the story, when they were at the olive branch and she hadn't met Ewan in the past yet, and she bumped into the server and chef, who was Ewan, he said, lemon? And he was handing them a lemon dessert that she almost knocked over. And she was like, oh yeah, that's our dessert, but I have to go, so sorry. And she left. And I knew it was going to be him because the back of the book literally says, the perfect man, you know, he has kind eyes, crooked smile, perfect recipe for a lemon meringue pie. So I had a feeling it was Ewan. I just knew. After she met him in the past, we knew that the chef and server that she bumped into in the beginning was Ewan. So that was quite obvious. And I don't know if Ashley Poston was trying to make it more, like, less obvious and more subtle, but I think it was quite obvious. And again, I don't have an issue with that, but someone reading this might go, oh, I hate predictable books, and that's okay. So that was something I predicted. There were definitely a couple other smaller things that I predicted as well, but again, like, to me, that wasn't a huge deal. To you, it might be though, and that's fine. Another thing, so this is the one thing I did not predict. I predicted like every twist and turn in this book except this one. I was not at all expecting Vera to be Ewan's mother. I don't know why that wasn't a thought that crossed my mind at all in this book until we got to the point where Clementine goes to meet Vera and she realizes she has a bit of a southern accent, right? She did the one shoulder shrug that Ewan is famous for. And she also said that her son makes the best coffee, as we know, Ewan does. And the photos on the wall, she realized that Ewan was Vera's son. And I just feel like, oh my goodness, I loved that. I loved that whole twist and turn because I wasn't expecting it. And in a way, because her aunt couldn't have a happy ending with Vera, I love that in a way, it's almost like her aunt sent you into her. It was almost like her aunt sent you into Clementine to get her happy ending because she couldn't have one. And when you look at it like that, my heart was just melting. I love that. I just loved that whole kind of part of the storyline. The fact that Vera was Ewan's mother. That was everything to me. It was everything. Because now Vera is going to be a part of Clementine's life, hopefully forever. So I just, yeah, that was so perfect. So I think those are all of my notes. I just want to read a couple quotes to you. I feel like this is going to be the longest book review ever. I'm so sorry. Okay, so some quotes that I loved. So on page 112, when they kissed in the past, 7 years ago when they kissed, I love that Ewan says, "You kiss like you dance," he murmured against my mouth. I broke away, suddenly appalled. "Terribly?" He laughed, but it was low and deep in his throat, half a growl, as he stole another kiss again, like someone waiting to be asked. "You can just dance, Lemon. You can take the lead." "And you'll follow?" "To the moon and back," he replied. Oh my goodness. If there was ever a book that had me giggling and kicking my feet, this one. So this was a line that I just thought was lovely. It's page 202, the first paragraph. "My aunt used to tell me that summer nights in the city were made to be impossible. They were as brief as you needed them, but never long enough. When the roads stretched into the darkness, the skyscrapers climbed into the stars, and when you tipped your head back, the sky felt infinite." That was poetry. Ashley Poston, like, chef's kiss, loved. On page 211, as he talked, I couldn't help but join into his excitement, like I did in the apartment. He talked too much with his hands, lacing adjectives into the air with his fingers, but it was endearing, and the other people in line couldn't help but lean in to listen. When he lit up, we were like moths to a flame. I wish this had been the side of him he'd shown in that conference room, and in that cooking class, everywhere really, that mattered. This was the part of him I feared had disappeared, but he'd just schooled it and kept it hidden for friends who wouldn't give up his secret. I liked that a lot. All right, the last quote I want to share with you is the last page, 326, the end of the book. "Nothing stayed, or so I had always thought. Nothing stayed and nothing lingered, but I was wrong. Because there was an apartment in the Monroe on the Upper East Side that was full of magic, and it taught me how to say goodbye. And it was no longer mine. That didn't matter, though, because I carried all of the good moments with me, the walls and the furniture, the clawfoot tub and the robin's egg blue chair, and the way my aunt danced me around the living room. So no matter where I was, I would always be home. Because the things that mattered most never really left. The love stays, the love always stays, and so do we." And that is my favorite book. So I also read the the author's note at the end, and I realized that Ashley Poston's grandfather passed away in the same way that Clementine's aunt did. And I listened to either a podcast or interview with Ashley Poston where she talked about this book and how she actually wrote a first draft of it. And I think in her own life she hadn't experienced losing someone in that way. So her first draft of this book, once she lost her grandfather in that way, she didn't think that the book truly showed what grief feels like. And so after she lost her grandfather in the exact same way that Clementine lost her aunt, she rewrote the book. And even though I haven't lost many people in my life that were really close to me, and I haven't lost anyone in that way, the way she wrote about grief was poetic and beautiful and heartbreaking, and it's exactly how I'd imagine someone would feel. And I think Ashley Poston just used, unfortunately, you know, she had to use her own life experiences with death and with someone passing away in that way, and she wrote about it in this book. She kind of was able to get it out through this character, which was actually kind of beautiful. So yeah, definitely if you haven't read the kind of author's note, which I don't know why you wouldn't, or the acknowledgments, but definitely read it because yeah, it explains a lot. And I love that she wrote the book again, and that is the book that I'm holding here. So I cannot get over this book. Truly my favorite book that I've read so far, and I don't know if anything else is going to come close to it. But that is The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I think this book is always going to have a very, very special place in my heart. It's the kind of story that I don't think I'm going to get over anytime soon. It's a book that I know I will pick up again. I know I will go back to it and love it just as much. But I stayed up late to finish it, and I was kind of sad to finish it because when a story is so good, you just wish it would go on forever. And so I was definitely heartbroken to finish it, but relieved that it had a happy ending. So I could not recommend this book more. 5 out of 5 stars. Truly, like, the whole magical realism and time travel and all of that is so cool to me, and I definitely want to read more books that relate to that kind of thing. So yeah, leave me all of your recommendations. I plan to read The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston maybe next, but I have other books as well that I need to get through. So yeah, I love this book so much. Oh my gosh. I cannot get enough of it, but I'm gonna stop going on and on now. So thank you so much for watching this video. I was so looking forward to filming it because I feel like I can't move on from a book until I just rant about it. And doing these reviews has kind of helped me to do that, so I can have closure, move on from this book, and move on to another one, and maybe find a new favorite down the line. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll stick around. Definitely subscribe, like my videos, and come back for more soon. See you next time.